think there's the interaction of things together is what really makes things make sense with music. So when you combine different elements of music together, so learning things in isolation by themselves is great, but it doesn't really make sense until you kind of bring these things together. So I think there's three different things that are important. So the first one is kind of learning your scales, right? So the building blocks of music. So for example, if you're playing a lot of rock music and blues music and all that kind of stuff is built around these ideas of these pentatonic scales. So for example, if you're in the key of A, so you start on an A note here and you descend down through this pentatonic scale, which is a 5-note scale, and so on. So that's a really familiar scale, like almost 90% of rock licks kind of are based around that scale. They don't just use it exclusively, but just those notes there. There's a whole world of melodies and riffs within those notes there. The great rock licks. Everything from great blues licks to rock licks. So just with those notes you can do a lot. But the thing is, those notes don't do you any good just in isolation. So those notes are kind of like the code or the building blocks of music. But where they really, make sense is in context with the harmony or the chords, right? So if you're playing in the key of A, a cool thing to do is to take that scale and then superimpose the chord over the top of it. So here's an A chord here. So if you look at the notes in the scale, and then you overlay the chord over the top of it, you'll see, just kind of fingering wise, they kind of fit together. They're not the same, but they fit together. So this is where a lot of like the rock licks come from. And there's a cool quote from Eric Clapton where he says, rock and roll is where you have two notes. This is paraphrasing, but when you have a couple of notes together, it creates the sound of rock and roll. That kind of graininess of that is really what gives it the kind of rock and roll sound. I mean, jazz is a lot of jazz is kind of jazz licks have that more of a single note sound, whereas rock has the more sound. So anyway, when you put those together, you got a couple of anomalies. So the first thing is that the scale is actually a minor scale. So you've got a root and a minor third, perfect fourth, fifth, and then a minor seventh. So it actually contains, a minor sound, but it's pentatonic. So all those notes have also a very stable sound. And what I mean by that is there's not a lot of dissonance on the notes. Like dissonant notes will be like minor seconds, or, diminished intervals and stuff have a very dissonant sound, whereas things like a minor third or a perfect fourth, you can almost land on those notes and it doesn't need to resolve, whereas if you land on certain notes, you just can't land on that note, so it has this kind of unstable sound where it wants to resolve. Okay, so now if you superimpose the chord on top of that scale, you'll notice there's kind of an anomaly there, is that the scale's minor, but the chord is major. So that's really interesting, because right there there's a clash, there's a sort of a dissonance between these two notes, and that is one of the secrets to rock and roll and blues and jazz music, is this kind of like this mystery between this minor third and major third. Is it major? Is it minor? Well, it's kind of both and in between. So it's kind of this like nomadic third here, where it can be either minor or it can be major, or it can be these kind of semitonal, microtonal. And that's one of the big sounds of rock and roll right there, is this kind of like. And it gives it this very vocal like quality, and so many licks are based around that idea of is it major, is it minor? Well, it's not, it's the blues. The blues is the notes that kind of live in between the cracks. So that's a minor third right there. And just to give it a slight bend, and it just puts that bluesiness on there. You know. Okay, so there you got your chord and your scale. And then the third thing is the rhythm or the timing. Now, to me, you know, timing is, there's not a right or wrong way of approaching timing. What it is, it's more about understanding the groove and the particular feel of a song. And I think that every song has its own feel. And if you want to be able to play a song, you basically just need to learn that song and learn that timing and really kind of get it into your bones. And it's interesting. I mean, I've worked with a lot of some of the greatest musicians, famous, amazing musicians, and I've actually been able to record them and then study the waveforms inside Pro Tools and look at like where they're actually playing in relation to the click. And what's interesting is it's not always like right on the click when they're playing. They'll sometimes play in front or behind, and they'll almost be playing, some of these amazing drummers will be playing around the beat and playing behind the beat or in front of the beat. And so with timing in music, it's not all about it being perfect, but it's about creating the right groove and accent. So for example, if you're playing a blues, like a basic blues, the basic rhythm would be, a shuffle sound. So you take that basic shuffle, and there's going to be lots of variations on that, and you start to kind of put that together with the notes of the scale. And then you start to also then add in the notes of the chord, like putting that major third in, or double notes. So for example, right there, I'm just playing down the scale, but I'm using the rhythm of the shuffle. And then I'm also adding in these double notes and throwing that major third in. So you notice there, even there, I'm starting to, just because you have this kind of context of here's the chord and here's the scale, you don't necessarily need to just stay within that chord and with that scale. You can move outside of it, but what you have to realize is as you move outside of it, you're creating tension. Now that sounds weird, but if you resolve it, okay, so you put those three elements together. You got your scale, you got your chord, and then you got your rhythm.